Greetings, Guzzlers. Yes, it's only Monday night, but I'm really enjoying embracing my inner English major and doing the Ben Reads. So tonight is another episode of Ben Reads, and what Ben will be reading is not a choose your own adventure book. Instead, I thought I would dip into my extensive collection of anthologies, science fiction and fantasy, all sorts of good stuff. I mean, some of them are right there behind me. But tonight's story is coming out of this Alan Dean Foster anthology. The book is titled With Friends Like These. The story itself, though, is one some of you might be familiar with. And I say that because its copyright is 1971. That's when it first saw print in Galaxy Science Fiction. I think that was a magazine. I don't know. It was quite literally before I was born. But it's a great short story that is the predecessor, or the inspiration, really, for yet another silly game that I play called Car Wars. Vroom, vroom. It's where you put guns on cars and drive around and shoot people. And it being set in a future America, they've televised it, and they make little arenas and sporting rinks. The AADA, American Auto Duel Association. Took a minute. Anyhow, so the story is called Why Johnny Can't Speed. And to help myself enjoy it, I've poured a bit of the Hellcat Maggie. I'm really enjoying this whiskey for sipping and reading. And my other cup our other glass is dirty, so I got the old First Brigade glass going for us. Excellent. Well, I reckon without further ado, we'll turn to page 38. And where am I? I won't be doing anything with reading glasses, because the print's just large enough. Now, Why Johnny Can't Speed by Alan Dean Foster. And it opens up with a very brief explanation from the author, which reads, "When I was a smaller kid than I am now, I used to play War on the Highway. You know, sit in the back seat with a ruler or broomstick or just my hands and annihilate the lady in the station wagon behind you, mow down the unknowing pedestrians on the sidewalks, blast that low-flying bomber, usually an innocent Piper Cub, out of the sky. But the best fantasy was to turn the headlights into ray guns, the side view mirror into a blaster, the tail fins into rocket launchers. I've been in traffic tie-ups where I wished I still had that magical adolescent armory. So have drivers around me. You can see it in their faces." All right, here we go. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Merwin, it is my painful duty to have to inform you that your son, Robert L. Merwin, was killed in commuter action on the southbound San Diego Freeway in the vicinity of the 2nd Irvine Ranch turnoff, Orange County. From what our evaluators have been able to reconstruct, young Robert apparently disputed a lane change with a black GM Caddy Marauder. No violation of the North American Traffic Code has come to my notice, but I will keep you informed should any such come to light. Normal investigations are proceeding. The other vehicle involved is known to Orange County Police. Its owner was questioned but not detained. Details and particulars are enclosed. Please accept my personal condolences. Yours sincerely, George Wilson Angel, Chief, Southern California Division, California District, Highway Patrol." Frank Merwin refolded the letter, replaced it in its envelope, and laid it on the flange of the lampstand near the radio. He held his wife a little more tightly. Her sobbing had become less than hysterical now that the terrible initial shock had somewhat worn. He managed to keep his own emotions pretty well in check, but then he had driven the Los Angeles area for some 20 years and was correspondingly toughened. When he finally spoke again, there was as much bitterness in his voice as sorrow. "Geez, Mert, geez." He eased her down onto the big white couch, walked to the center of the room, and paused there, hands clenching and unclenching, clasped behind his back. The woven patterns in the floor absorbed his attention. God damn it, Myrtle. I told him. I told him. Look, son, if you insist on driving all the way to Diego by yourself, at least take the Pontiac. Have some sense. I told him. I don't know what's with the kids these days, hun. You'd think he'd listen to me just this once, wouldn't you? Me, who once drove all the way from Indianapolis to L.A. and was challenged only twice on the way. Only twice, Mert, but no, he had to be a big shot. Listen, Dad, this is something I've got to work out for myself, with my own car. He tells me. I knew he'd have trouble in that VW, and I often told him so, too. But no, all he could think of to say was, Pops, the worst that can happen is I've got to outmaneuver some other car, right? You've seen the way that bug corners, haven't you, huh? And if I get in a tough scrape, any other VW on the road is bound by oath to support me. In most actions, anyway. What do you tell a kid like that, Mert? How do you get through to him? His face registered utter bafflement. His wife's crying had slowed to a trickle. She was dabbing at her eyes with one of his old handkerchiefs. I don't know either, dear. I still don't understand why he had to drive down there. Why couldn't he have taken the trans, Frank? Why? Oh, you know why. What would his friends have said? Here's Bobby Merwin, too scared to drive his own rod, and that sort of crud. His sarcasm was getting edgier. Still felt he had to prove himself a man, the idiot. He'd already soloed on the freeways. Why did he feel the need to try a cross-country expedition? But damn it, if he had to display his guts, why couldn't he have done so in the big car? Not even a professionally customized VW can mount much stuff. And on top of everything else, you'd think he'd have had the sense to shy off that kind of an argument. He had driver's training. Who ever heard of a VW disputing position with a cad? A marauder, no less. Where were his friends, huh? I warned him about the light stretches between here and Diego, where flow is light, help is more than a horn blast away, and some psycho can surprise you from behind an on-ramp. He paused to catch his breath. He walked back to the lampstand and picked up the letter. Familiar with the contents, he glanced at it only briefly this time. He offered it to his wife, but she declined, so he returned it to the stand. You know what I have to do now, I suppose. She nodded, sniffling. Bob was taking that gift to a friend in Diego. I'm bound to see that it's delivered. She looked up at him without much hope. She knew Frank. I don't suppose... He shook his head. His expression was gentle but firm. No, hon, I'm taking it down myself. I refuse to ship it, and I certainly won't ride the trans. Not after all these years. No, I'm going down the same way Bob went, by the same route. I'll have the JJ tuned first, though. She looked around dully, plucking fitfully at the delicate covering of the couch. I suppose you'll at least take it into... Hector, certainly. In spite of what he charges, he's damn well worth the money. Best mechanic around. I enjoy doing business with him. I know I'm getting my credit's worth at least. We couldn't have me going somewhere else now, could we? Wouldn't want him to get the idea we're prejudiced or something. I've been going to him for, 5 years. Almost forgotten what he is. Going all the way down to Diego, eh, Mr. Merwin? Said the wiry Chicano. He was trying to rub some of the grease off his hands. The filthy rag he was using already appeared incapable of taking on any more of the tacky blue-black gunk. Yeah, so you'll understand, Hector, when I say the JJ's got to be in tip-top shape. Ciertamente, you want to open her up, please? Frank nodded and moved over to where the JJ rested, just inside the rolled-up armor grill entrance to the big garage. He slid into the deep pile of the driver's bucket, flipped the 3 keys on the combination ignition, and then jabbed the hood release switch. As soon as the hood started up, he climbed out, leaving the keys in the on position. Hector was already bent over the car's power plant, staring intently into the works. Well, Mr. Merwin, from what I can see, your engine at least is in excellent condition. Yes, excellent. You want me to fill her up? Frank nodded wordlessly. He wasn't at all surprised at the mechanic's rapid inspection of the engine. After all, the JJ had been given the best of professional care and the benefits of his own considerable work since he'd purchased her. Hector did not look up as he set about releasing the protective panels over the right side 70 caliber. If I may ask, how do you plan to go? Frank had the big meerschaum out and was tamping tobacco into it. I'll go down Burbank to the San Diego freeway and get on there. It'd be a little faster to get on the Ventura, but on a trip of this length, that little bit of time saved would be negligible, and I don't see the point in fighting the interchange. Hector nodded approvingly. Quite wise. You know, Mr. Merwin, you've got 2 pretty bad stretches on this trip. Very iffy. I read about your son. I sorrow. The Jornada de la Muerte comes eventually to us all. Frank paused in lighting the pipe. Couldn't be helped, he said tightly. Bob didn't realize what he was getting into, that's all. I blame myself, too, but what could I do? He was 18, and by law, there wasn't anything I could do to hold him back. He simply took on more than he could handle. One of Hector's grease monks had wheeled over a bulky ammo cart. The mechanic waved the assistant off and proceeded about the loading himself. Frank appreciated the gesture. A cad, wasn't it? It was. He was leaning over the mechanic's shoulder, better to follow the loading process. Never could tell what you might have to do for yourself on the road. What are you giving me? Explosive or armor piercing? Mixed. Hector slammed down the box load cover on the heavy gun. It clicked shut, locked. He moved away to get a small curved ladder and wheeled it back. At the top, he began checking over the custom roof turret. Both alternating sequence. True, it's more expensive, but after all, your son's car was destroyed by a marauder. A black one? Yes, that's right, said Frank, only mildly surprised. How'd you find out? Oh, among the trade, the word gets passed along. I know of this particular vehicle, I believe. Owner does a lot of his own work, I understand. That's tough to tangle with, Mr. Merwin. Might you be thinking of? Frank shrugged and looked the other way. Never know who you'll bump into on these roads these days, Hector. I've never been one to run from a dogfight. He gestured meaningfully at the side of the car. 11 silhouettes were imprinted there. 4 mediums, 4 compacts. Crazy people. Gutsy, but crazy. 2 sports cars. Kids, a Jag and a Vet, as he recalled. He smiled in reminiscence. Speed wasn't everything. And 1 large gold stamping. He ran his hand over the impressions fondly. That big gold one, he'd gotten that baby on the legendary drive out from Indianapolis back in 83. No, 82. 1982. The Imperial had been rough, and, face it, he had been lucky as hell. Too young to know better. Ricochet shots were always against the odds, but hell, anyone could shoot at tires. So he'd thought 20-odd years ago. Now he knew better, didn't he? He wondered if Bob had tried something equally insane. Yes, well, you watch yourself, Mr. Merwin. A Marauder is bad news straight from the factory. Properly customized, it can mount enough stuff to take on a Greyhound bus knot. Don't worry about me, Hector. I can take care of myself. He was checking the nylon sheathing on the rear tires. Besides, the JJ mounts a few surprises of her own. It was already warm outside, even at 5 in the morning. The Weather Bureau had forecast a high of 101 degrees Fahrenheit for downtown LA. He'd missed most of that, but even with air control and climate conditioning, things could get hot. He turned on the climate cool as he backed the blue sedan out of the garage, put it in drive, and rolled toward the Burbank artery. It was still too early for the real rush hour, and he had little company on the feeder route as he moved past Van Nuys Boulevard toward the Sepulveda on-ramp. A Rambler at the light was slow in getting away at the change of signal. He blasted the horn once, and the frantic driver of the heavily neutral marked vehicle made haste to get out of the way. Theoretically, all cars on the surface streets were equal, but some were more equal than others. The Sepulveda on-ramp was an excellent one for entering the system for reasons other than merely being an easier way to pass through the Ventura interchange. Instead of sloping upward as most on-ramps did, it allowed the driver to descend a high hill. This enabled older cars to pick up a lot of valuable acceleration easily, and also provided the driver with an aerial overview of the traffic pattern below. He passed the commuter car park at the Kestertrans station. It was just beginning to fill as the more passive commuters parked their personal vehicles in favor of the public trams. He felt a surge of contempt, the usual reaction of the independent motorist to milk-footed drivers willfully abandoning their vehicular freedom for the crowding and crumpling of the mass transit systems. What sort of person did it take, he wondered for the umpteenth time, to trade away his birthright for simple sardine can safety? The country was definitely losing its backbone. He shook his head woefully as his practiced eye gauged the pattern shifting beneath him. Mass trans had required and still required a lot of money. One way in which the governments involved, meaning those of most industrial developed nations, went about obtaining the necessary amounts was to cut back the expensive motorized forces needed to regulate the far-flung freeway systems. As the cutbacks increased, it gradually became accepted custom among the remaining overworked patrols to allow drivers to settle their own disputes. This custom was finalized by the Supreme Court's handing down of the famous Briver versus Matthews and the state of Texas decision of '79, in which it was ruled that all attempts to regulate interstate, nonstop highway systems were in direct violation of the First Amendment. Any motorist who didn't feel up to potential arguments was provided a safe, quiet, alternative means of transportation in the new mass trans systems, most of which ran down the center and sides of the familiar freeway routes, high above the frantic traffic. Benefits were immediate. Less pollution from even the fine turbine steam electric engines of the private autos, an end to many downtown parking problems in the big cities, and more. For the first time since their inception, the freeways, even at rush hour, became negotiable at speeds close to those envisioned by their builders. And psychiatrists began to advise driving as excellent therapy for persons afflicted with violent or even homicidal instincts. Now, there were a few un-American, dirty, commie, pinko simps, no doubt, who decried the resultant proliferation of argumentative devices among high-powered autos. Some laughable folk even talked of an arms race among automakers. German cars made their biggest incursions into foreign markets in decades. Armor plating, bulletproof glass alloy, certain weaponry. How else did those nuts expect a decent man to drive with confidence? He gunned the engine and the supercharged sedan roared down the on-ramp, gathering unnecessary but impressive momentum as it went. Frank had always believed in an aggressive entrance. Let them know where you stand right away or they'll ride all over you. The tactic was hardly needed in this instance. There were only two other cars in his entrance pattern, both in the far two lanes. He switched slowly until he was behind them, looking into his rear and side view mirror carefully for fast approaching others. The lanes behind were clear, and he had no trouble attaining the fourth lane of the five. Safer here. Plenty of room for feisty types to pass on either side, and he could still maintain a decent speed without competing with dragsters. He pushed the JJ up to an easy 75 miles per, settled back for the long drive. He spotted only two wrecks as he sped smoothly through the Sepulveda Pass, about normal for this early in the day. The Helicrane crew were probably in the process of changing shifts, so these wrecks would lie a bit longer than at other busier times of the day. His first view of action came as he approached the busy Wilshire on-ramps. Two compacts squared off awkwardly. The slow lane was occupied by a four-door Toyota. A Honda Coupe, puffing mightily to build speed up on the upgrade, or on the on-grade. Let's retry that. Puffing mightily to build speed up the on-grade, came off the ramp at a bad position. It required one or the other to slow for a successful entrance, and the sedan, having superior position, understandably refused to be the one. Instead of taking the quiet course, the Honda maintained its original approach speed and fired an unannounced broadside from its small 25 caliber, Frank judged, window-mounted swivel gun. The sedan swerved crazily for a moment as its driver, startled, lost control for a few seconds. Then it straightened out and regained its former attitude. Frank and the cars behind him slowed to give the combatants plenty of lane space in which to operate. The armor glass was taking the attack, and the sedan began to return fire. About equal standard factory equipment, he guessed. They were already reaching the end of the entrance lane. Desperately, refusing to concede the match, the coupe cut sharply at the nose of the sedan. The sedan's owner swerved easily into the second lane and then cut tightly back. At this angle, his starboard gun bore directly on the coupe. A loud bang heralded a shattered tire. With a short, almost slow-motion bump, the coupe hit the guardrail and flipped over out of sight. In his rearview mirror, Frank could just make out the first few wisps of smoke as he shot past the spot. Now that the fight was over, Frank floored the accelerator again, throwing the victorious driver a fast salute. It was returned gracefully. Considering his limited stuff, the fellow had done very well. He'd handled the figure C with ease, but the maneuver would have been useless against a larger car. Frank's own, for example. Still, compact drivers were a special breed and often made up for their lack of power, engine, and fire in sheer guts. He still watched Don Railman and his super sub religiously on that early Sunday tele, even though the ratings were down badly from last season. He'd also never forget that time when a weekly Car Rippers telemanual with old Ev Kelly had done a special on some hand-tooled Mighty Mite, low-bore, cut down, with the web-core anti-tank gun cleverly concealed in the front trunk. No, it paid not to take the compacts, even the subs, too lightly. He passed the Santa Monica interchange without trouble. In fact, the only thing resembling a confrontation he had on the whole LA portion of the drive occurred a few minutes later as he swept past the Los Angeles Subinternational Airport rampings. A new Vet, all shiny and gold, blasted up behind him. It stayed there, tailgating. That in itself was a fighting provocation. He could see the driver clearly. A young girl, probably in her late teens. About Bob's age, he thought tightly. No doubt Daddy Dear had bought the bomb for her. She honked at him sharply, insistently, and he ignored her. She could pass it to either side with ease. Instead, she fired a low burst of tracers across his rear deck. When he resolutely continued to ignore her, she pouted, then pulled alongside. Giggling, she threw him an obscene gesture which even his not-so-archaic mind could identify. He jerked hard on the wheel, then back. Her haughty expression disappeared instantly, to be replaced by one of fright. When she saw it was merely a feint on his part, she smiled again, although much less arrogantly, and shot ahead at a good 100 miles per. Stupid kid, better watch her manners. Never lived to make 20,000 miles. Maybe he should have given her a lesson. Burn off a tire, perhaps. Oh well, he had a long way to drive. Let someone else play teacher. Are you enjoying it so far? I am. It's so good. He became quiet and watchful as he left Santa Ana and entered the Irvine area. There was little commuter traffic here and only a few harmless beachers this early in the day. He saw only one car in the CADS class, and that was an old yellow Thunderhood. Wasn't sure whether or not to be disappointed or relieved as he pulled into the San Clemente rest stop for breakfast. He could have eaten at home, but preferred to slip out without waking Myrtle. He'd have a couple of eggs, maybe some toast and jam, and enjoy a view of the Pacific, along with his coffee, despite the low clouds which had been rolling in for the last 20 minutes. He hoped it wouldn't rain, even though rain would cut the heat. Weather was one reason he always avoided the safer but longer desert routes. Thunder showers inland were forecast, and even the best tactical driver could be outmatched in a heavy downpour. He preferred to be in a situation where his talents could operate without complications wished on him by nature. A few warm drops, fat and heavy, hit him as he left the diner. It had grown much darker and the humidity was fierce. Still, Irvine was behind him now. Best to make speed down to Diego and get home before dark. He had only the well-policed Camp Pendleton lanes ahead, and then the near-deserted Oceanside to La Jolla Run before he'd hit any real traffic again. Contrary to early predictions, the California population had spread inland instead of along the largely state-owned coast. If he'd had the sense to buy that 100 acres near Mojave before the airport had gone in there. On the left, he could see the old presidential palace shining on its solitary hill. He waved nostalgically, then speeded up slightly as he approached the Pendleton cutoff. The drizzle remained so light he didn't even bother with wipers. Pendleton was passed quickly, and he had no reason to stop in Oceanside. Soon he was cruising among rolling, downy hills, mellow in the diffused sunlight. A few cattle were the only living creatures in evidence, along with a few big crows circling lazily overhead in the moist air. Once a cycle pack roared noisily past, long 20s damp with dew. 2 tricycles headed up the front and rear of the pack, but the ugly snouts of the recoilless rifles were covered against a possible downpour. They took no notice of him, rumbling past at a solid 95 miles an hour. He had no wish to tangle with a gang, not in this empty territory. A good driver could knock out 3 or 4 of the big Harley-Davidsons and Yamahas easily enough, but the highly maneuverable bikes could swarm over anything smaller than a bus or trailer with ease, magnifying the effect of their light weapons. Maybe he could buy some land out here. He gazed absently at the green and gold hills, devoid of housing tracts and supermarkets. Not another Mojave, maybe, but still. A sharp honking snapped his attention reflectively to his mirrors. He recognized the license of the big black coupe almost at the instant he identified the make and model. "You're south of your territory, fella," he thought grimly. His hands clenched tightly on the wheel as he slid over one lane. Here we go. The cad pulled up beside him, preparatory to passing. He judged the moment precisely, then tripped a switch on his center console. The portside flamethrower erupted in a jet of orange flame. The cad jerked like a singed kitten. Instantly, Frank cut over to the far lane, putting as much distance as possible between him and the big car, staying slightly ahead of the other. A long dark streak showed clearly on the coupe's front, a deep gash in the tire material. The cad would have trouble if it tried any sharp moves in his direction now, and Frank saw no problem in holding his present position. Now he could duck at the first off-ramp if need arose. He activated the roof turret, an expensive option, but one which had proven its worth time and again. Myrtle had opted for the big grenade launcher, but Frank and the GM salesman had convinced her that while showiness might be for impressing the neighbors, on the road it was performance that counted. The twin 50s in the turret commenced hammering away at the cad, nicking big chips of armor glass and battle sheathing from its front. Frank was feeling confident until a violent explosion rocked him nastily and forced him to throw emergency power to the steering. Frightened, he glanced over his shoulder. Thank God for the automatic sprinklers. The rear of his car above the left wheel was completely gone, as was most of the rear deck. Twisted blackened metal and torn insulation smoked and groaned. A look at the cad confirmed his worst fears and sent even more sweat pouring down his shirt collar. No wonder this marauder had acquired such a reputation. In place of the standard heavy cad machine guns, a Mark IV rocket launcher protruded from the rear trunk. Fortunately, the shot had hit at a bad angle, or he'd be missing a wheel, and his ability to maneuver would have been drastically, perhaps fatally, reduced. He did an S just in time. Another rocket shrieked past his bumper. The turret 50s were doing their job, but it was slow, too slow. Another rocket strike would finish him, and now the CAD had its big guns going too. He wished to hell he was in the cab of a big United Truckers tractor-trailer, high above the concrete, with another driver and a gunner on the twin 60mm. A crack appeared in his rear window as the CAD's guns concentrated their fire. He turned and twisted, accelerated and slowed, not daring to give his opponent another clear shot with those Mark IVs. Chance time, Frank, baby. Remember Salt Lake City. He cut hard left. The CAD cut right to get behind him. At the proper yes second, he dropped an emergency switch. The rear backup lights dropped off the JJ. At the same time, a violent crump threw him forward so hard he could feel the cross harness bite into his chest. Fighting desperately for control and cursing all the way, he slammed into the resilient center divider with a jolt that rattled his teeth. Two wheels spinning crazily off the pavement, then cut all the way back across the 5 lanes. Fighting a busted something all the way, he managed to wrestle the battered sedan to a tired halt on the gravel shoulder. Panting heavily, he undid the safety harness, staggered out of the car, bracing himself against the metal sides. Behind him, a quarter mile or so down the empty road, a thick plume of roiling black smoke billowed up from a pile of twisted metal, plastics, and ceramics, all intertwined with bright orange flame. The big bad black CAD was quite finished. He took one step in its direction, then stopped, dizzied by the effort. No driver could survive that inferno. In his eagerness to get behind the sedan, the CAD's driver had shot over at least one, possibly both, of the proximity mines Frank had released from where his backup lights had been. Maybe revenge was an outdated commodity today, but he still felt exhilarated. And Myrtle might complain initially, but he knew damn well she'd be pleased inside. He became aware of something wet trickling down his cheek, more than could have come from the sporadically dripping sky. His hand told him a piece of his left ear was missing. The blood was staining his good driving blouse. Absently, he dabbed at the nick with a handkerchief. His rear glass must have gone at the last possible minute. A look confirmed it, showing 2 neat holes and a third questionable one in his rear window. He'd had closer calls before, and this one was worth it. At least there'd be one license plate to lay on Bob's grave. He sighed. Better stop off in Carlsbad and get that ear taken care of. Damnation! If only that boy had paid some attention in driver's ed, 18 years old, and he'd never learned what his old man had known for years. Be safe. Drive offensively. Wow. 1971. Cars with guns. I'm surprised, quite frankly, that we haven't reached that point. Although, the way things are headed, I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes reality within the next 10 years. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the story. Alan Dean Foster, Why Johnny Can't Speed. Cheers!